Last we left, we were understanding what it means to be a conqueror and the sort of impact and legacy Alexander's name left for other individuals of note. But we also began to uncover the differences between Macedonia and Greece of the time. See, to the Greeks of Athens, Macedonia barely seemed civilized. Its people wore animal skins, they hunted wild boar, they drank wine straight from great horns without even diluting it. Their kings fought in the front ranks. Their nobles measured status not by speeches or philosophy, but by scars. To the cultured Greeks of the south, Macedonia appeared rough, primitive, almost barbaric. But history has a habit of underestimating hard people and hard places. Because while Athens debated politics, as I said, beneath marble columns, Macedonia was forging warriors. In Macedonia, manhood was not something granted, it was earned. Ancient writers claimed that a young noble could not recline at a banquet until he had personally killed a wild boar. A soldier could not remove the rope tied around his waist until he had taken a life in battle. Boys learned to ride before they learned politics. They hunted dangerous animals, trained with weapons, and grew up in a society where violence was not an exception, it was a fact of life. If Athens represented civilization, Macedonia represented survival. And survival creates a different kind of person, a different kind of leader, the kind willing to endure hardship, the kind willing to gamble everything, the kind capable of changing history. One of those leaders was about to emerge. His name was Philip. When Philip was born around 383 BC, the Macedonian royal court resembled less a government and more a blood-soaked drama. Assassinations, plots, political marriages, family betrayals. The throne was never truly secure. Kings died suddenly. Relatives maneuvered for power. Alliances shifted constantly. And in the center of it all stood a young prince, growing up in an environment where weakness could be fatal. For Philip, politics was never an abstract concept. It was survival. Then came Thebes. In 368 BC, Philip was sent south as a hostage. Not a prisoner, but a guarantee. A living promise that Macedonia would honor its agreements. For most young nobles, such an experience might have been humiliating. For Philip, it became an education. Because he arrived in Thebes at exactly the right moment. You see, Thebes had recently achieved something almost unimaginable. It had defeated Sparta. For generations, Sparta had been the dominant military power in Greece. Its warriors were feared throughout the ancient world. Its reputation seemed untouchable. Then a brilliant general named Epaminondas shattered that illusion, and Philip was there to witness the aftermath. History often turns on moments no one notices. A conversation, a lesson, an observation. A young prince studying the methods of successful generals. Years later, those lessons would reappear inside the Macedonian army, larger, stronger, more refined. Thebes planted the seed, Philip would grow the tree. Yet Philip's education extended beyond warfare. Thebes exposed him to philosophy, government, mathematics, new ways of thinking. The young Macedonian prince who arrived wearing the traditions of the North encountered an entirely different world. One built on ideas, one built on debate, innovation. He absorbed everything, not because he wished to become Greek, but because he intended to become stronger. When Philip finally returned home, Macedonia stood on the edge of disaster. His brothers were dead. Enemies threatened every border. The kingdom appeared vulnerable. Many rulers would have seen crisis. Not Philip. Philip saw opportunity. See, the remarkable thing about Philip is not merely that he survived. It is that he transformed survival into dominance. He campaigned in nearly every year of his reign. He fought in the front ranks. He lost an eye. He shattered bones. He suffered wounds that would have permanently scarred him. Yet he continued, year after year, campaign after campaign, victory after victory. The ancient orator Demosthenes hated Philip, feared him, warned Athens about him constantly. Yet even Demosthenes could not hide a begrudging respect. Looking at the injuries Philip endured in pursuit of power, he could only marvel. What a man. Philip understood something many rulers never do. War was not glory, war was policy. It was a tool, a means to an end. Every campaign served a purpose, every alliance created leverage, every victory strengthened Macedonia. While others chased fame, Philip built foundations. And nowhere was this more obvious than in his marriages. Kings throughout history married for politics. Philip simply did it more often. Each marriage secured alliances, opened doors, stabilized borders, and expanded influence. To Philip, marriage was another battlefield, another instrument of statecraft, another move in a much larger game. One of those marriages would change history forever, because among Philip's many wives was a young princess from Epirus, a woman named Olympias. And if Philip was the most formidable man of his generation, Olympias may have been the most formidable woman. Ancient writers described her as mysterious, intense, dangerous, a devotee of Dionysus, the god of ecstasy, transformation, madness, and all hidden impulses lurking beneath civilization's thin surface. She surrounded herself with symbols associated with the god, rituals, ceremonies, snakes, always snakes. Whether these stories are true is difficult to know, but ancient historians rarely treated powerful women fairly. But one thing is clear, Olympias left an impression. Even Philip may have found her unsettling. And for a man who faced armies without fear, that says something. When Philip and Olympias married, they united two remarkable bloodlines. Philip's family claimed descent from Heracles, the greatest hero of Greece. Olympia's family claimed descent from Achilles, the greatest warrior of the Iliad. Legend met legend, myth met myth, and soon they would have a son. A child raised on stories of gods and heroes. A child who would spend his life measuring himself against impossible standards. A child named Alexander. The empire was taking shape. The army was ready. The kingdom was stronger than ever. And somewhere in Macedonia, a boy was growing up believing that greatness was his birthright. Soon, the world would learn his name. History remembers Alexander the Great as the conqueror, the king, the man who marched to the edge of the known world. But like I said, long before Alexander became a legend, there were two people whose influence shaped out everything he would become. One built the kingdom, the other shaped the king. And for centuries, historians have argued over which was more important. One was, of course, Philip himself, and the other, his wife, Olympias. And depending on who is telling the story, Olympias was either a devoted mother or one of the most dangerous women in ancient history. Ancient history, but there's also mystery abounds within it. Ancient history has a habit of turning powerful women into myths. Men become generals, women become mysteries. And few figures have attracted more mystery than Olympias. The surviving accounts describe a woman surrounded by religious rituals, secret ceremonies, prophecies, and snakes, especially snakes. Ancient writers seemed obsessed with them. Some claimed she kept tame serpents within her chambers. Others suggested she participated in strange religious rites imported from the wild frontiers beyond Greece. To later historians, Olympias became almost supernatural, a queen wrapped in shadows, a woman whose presence seemed to disturb everyone around her. But there's a problem with these stories. See, most of them were written by men, and most of these men already disliked powerful women. The ancient world was not a place where queens were expected to wield influence openly. When a man accumulated power, he was called ambitious. When a woman accumulated power, she was often called dangerous. So as we often read these stories about Olympias, it's worth asking the simple question, how much of what we know is history and how much is propaganda? Because regardless of what later writers claimed, Olympias clearly possessed something that frightened people: influence. Not over armies, not over governments, but over Alexander himself. And that influence may have changed the course of world history. See, while Olympias became the subject of legends, another figure was quietly transforming Macedonia itself, and that was Alexander's father, Philip. If Alexander became one of history's greatest conquerors, Philip may have become one of history's greatest builders. Because before Philip took power, as we said before, Macedonia was not the dominant force we imagine today. It was unstable, surrounded by enemies, threatened from every direction. The kings rose and fell with alarming speed. Assassinations were common. Civil wars erupted frequently. Entire reigns could end in violence. For generations, Macedonia seemed to be trapped in a cycle of crisis until Philip arrived. When Philip became king, he inherited a kingdom that many outsiders considered backwards. The sophisticated city-states of southern Greece looked down upon the Macedonians. To Athenians, Macedonia was rough, provincial, and uncivilized. But those same Athenians would soon discover something dangerous. A kingdom does not need to be sophisticated to be powerful. It only needs the right leader. And Philip was exactly that. He possessed something rare in history: the ability to see opportunities where others saw limitations. Unlike many rulers, Philip did not simply react to events. He studied them, learned from them, absorbed lessons from every rival and every battlefield. As a young man, Philip spent time in Thebes. And as I said, at that time, Thebes was one of the most innovative military minds in the Greek world. They had recently shattered Spartan dominance, an achievement that would have seemed impossible only a generation earlier. Most rulers would have viewed such events from a distance. Philip studied them, because somewhere within those victories was a lesson, and Philip intended to learn it. History often celebrates dramatic moments, battles, conquests, coronations. But some of the most important events happen quietly, inside libraries, around dinner tables, in conversations that no one records. And it's possible that during these years in Thebes, Philip encountered ideas that would change warfare forever. New tactics, new formations, new ways of thinking about battle. Ideas that would eventually become the foundation of Macedonian supremacy. But before any of that could happen, he had to solve a more immediate problem: survival. Macedonia's enemies were numerous, and they surrounded the kingdom. The Illyrians, the Thracians, rival tribes and rival kingdoms. Every frontier seemed threatened. Every weakness invited attack. Philip understood that if Macedonia hoped to survive, it needed more than courage. It needed transformation, and transformation begins with vision. Most rulers inherit armies. Philip decided to create one. Not merely a larger army, not simply a stronger army, something entirely different. A military system, a machine, a force designed not merely to win battles, but to dominate them. This would become Philip's greatest achievement. Not diplomacy, not politics, not conquests, the army. The weapon that would carry Macedonia from obscurity to greatness. The weapon Alexander would one day inherit. And perhaps that is the most important thing to remember when discussing Alexander. Great conquerors rarely emerge from nothing. History often focuses on the final act, the victories, the glory, the legend. But legends require foundations. Someone must build the roads, forge the weapons, train the soldiers, create the opportunities before Alexander could conquer the world. Someone had to build the machine that made such a dream possible, and that someone was Philip. And the story of how he forged that machine is the story of how the ancient world changed forever. Next time, we explore the military revolution that transformed Macedonia from a vulnerable kingdom into the most feared power in the known world. The birth of the pike phalanx, the army that would terrify empires, and the weapon that would carry Alexander forward and carry him towards immortality. Thanks for listening, and be sure to like and subscribe. This has been A Slice of History.